my whole arc, right? So converted at 13, running away from nihilism. Um, and I usually say that I kind of pursued, ran away from the idea of nihilism um, by chasing after apologetics and by chasing after Christian mysticism.
Hmm.
So, I was pretty deep in the Pentecostal movement, but specifically kind of the mystical, ecstatic experiences side of things that I still kind of have a soft spot for. Um, yeah, the Kim Walker Smith kind of version of what that looks like.
Hmm. I don't
Um,
know. I'm not familiar with her.
she was, I believe, she was the head of Jesus Culture, Bethel and Reading,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
some of that kind of stuff. I wasn't quite all in on that, and I'm also always like nervous to throw out any names whenever I talk about like, the kinds of Christians that I liked and followed,
Yeah.
because invariably there's somebody who's going to try to like invalidate my background with like, oh, well, no wonder he apostatized. He was listening to Bill Johnson, or like, well, yeah, but I was also listening to John Piper, and I was also listening to James White, and I was listening to Ravi Zacharias, whoever your favorite preacher is too. So don't throw me out too quick. Um, anyway. But yeah, so I was into all that in high school. My junior year of high school, I became the worship leader at this private, Christian high school. And then senior year, I became the worship leader and the student chaplain. So I was, preaching a couple of times a week to the middle schoolers and high schoolers, and then I was singing to Jesus and standing on a cafeteria table outside, preaching to the kids, and that was just kind of my whole world. So after high school, I was like, well, I want to be the next Billy Graham or something like that. I want to go save the world for Jesus and sing and do all that jazz. So I was like, well, I definitely don't want to go to a stale, uh, you know, Christian college where I'm going to go, get pumped full of a bunch of head knowledge. I want somewhere that's going to churn me out to be a zealot. So
Which you
I
already
went,
were.
yeah, yeah. So I wanted a place to further refine that. And I ended up going to I believe it's no longer in existence, but it was called Fire School of Ministry, um, which is kind of akin to like a YWAM type thing. So it is a 3-year non-accredited school of practical ministry. So usually when I talk about it, I just tell people, oh, I went to a pseudo seminary, and they don't know what that means. So I usually just say seminary and uh, cross my fingers. Um,
Well, I had heard you mention seminary before, so that kind of piqued my interest to say, oh, well, which seminary
yeah.
did he go to? So okay, but
So not,
that makes sense.
yeah, not bona fide seminary. I'm not
Right.
ordained or anything, but for all intents and
The
purposes,
focus of everything was deployment of Christian ministers either at
yes.
home or abroad.
Exactly, exactly. So Fire had a huge network of missionaries for its size. Um, Actually, do you know Dr. Michael Brown?
Yeah, he's on YouTube, isn't he?
He is, yeah. He's a pretty big presence on YouTube. He wrote the 5 volumes, answering Jewish objections to Jesus.
Oh,
A Queer Thing Happened to America. So, he's pretty conservative.
okay.
Um, nice dude though. But yeah, so he was the head of Fire School of Ministry. So I
Uh,
was one of his students. Um, and yeah, graduated 2016 from his neck of the woods. And then it shut down 3, 4 years after that. So worst part of it though, and a big part of my story is like occasionally in my church audits, I'll mention that I was a part of a cult. Um,
hmm.
and so that was, core part of my story that while I was at Fire, right, this 3-year pseudo seminary, they required you to do an internship for a semester. So I was like, cool, well, I'm not going to stick around here. And, also, can I swear? Is that allowed?
Go right ahead.
No? Okay. Okay. Um,
Speak your truth.
I'll abstain a little bit. I'm not going to stick around here in bumfrick, North Carolina. I'm going to go somewhere cool. So I met a pastor who lived in the Netherlands, in Rotterdam, and I was like, oh, Rotterdam, that sounds like cool. And at this point, I was starting to become more intellectual with things, and I was like, I saw some real crazies with the charismania at Fire. So I was getting more into apologetics and early Christian studies and all of that to kind of distance myself a little bit from it. I still was there, but that's kind of what set me apart from the other kids there. Oh, Jared, yeah, he prays, but not quite enough, and he's a little bit of a theology
Yeah,
nerd.
you thought you were a zealot until you weren't there and realized, oh,
Yeah,
there are levels of zealotry above me. It's the same thing that happens to every small town kid. He's really good on the piano. Then he goes to Juilliard and it's like,
yep, yep.
fringes have fringes, baby.
You're not wrong. That's very accurate. So yeah, I don't know. I went yeah, I went and studied under this pastor, did an internship with him in Rotterdam in the Netherlands for a semester. Um, and I'm comfortable saying that even though Fire here in North Carolina was culty at times, but it wasn't a bona fide cult. But in Rotterdam, that chapter was sectarian enough and domineering enough that I would feel comfortable considering it a cult. Um, that being said, visiting some of the cults that I've visited recently, it's given me a much greater appreciation. Like, oh yeah, it was a cult, but it wasn't like, geez, it wasn't Jim Jones. Um, some of the other places that I've visited recently, that might be another story. But so yeah, I mean that chapter was really hard and really painful. And I took my faith very seriously, and I took the idea of living out my faith very seriously. Um, and then I think it struck me, a few months being there, like, I don't know if I can do what I think the gospel demands of me.
Hmm.
Um, this is a really hard and lonely life, you know, street preaching every week, protesting at abortion clinics every week, or every other week. Uh,
Now, was this the practice of that group, or was this the
yeah,
practice that you had just sort of said, this is the Christian life?
both. I mean, I was there because I believed in it. I think that my modus operandi would have been a little different, if I
Yeah.
weren't, I wasn't opposed to street preaching and I wasn't opposed to protesting, but it felt like they were doing it without tact. They were doing it just impulsively, or compulsively rather. So, um, yeah, I don't know.
Hmm.
Um,
But this begins to dawn on you that
so I
you're
mean, to give a little bit of context, like my roommate, he was a really awesome Frenchman named Pierre, kind of the quintessential Frenchman in my mind. Uh, the slick back hair and the turtlenecks, and he was great. He was a monk. I mean, like the quintessential modern monk. I've never met anyone more austere than this man. Um, he did not watch television on principle. He did not watch YouTube videos. He did not listen to music, worship music or otherwise, ever. All he did was read the Bible and listen to sermons and pray. So, his ritual was like every night for probably an hour in our tiny little apartment in Rotterdam, he would just lock himself in his bedroom and you would hear him switch back and forth between French, English, and tongues. So he'd be like, oh God, bring up revival to America. Oh God, please cast out the demons that are tormenting this place. Oh, and and I mean, that was just his whole world every single night.
yeah.
Um, Whenever we would do sound checks at the church, I would be like, hey, Pierre, James chapter 3, verse 4. Brothers and sisters, I tell unto you, do not but disbelieve the photo. And he would just recite it verbatim. Um, and it's like, man, if this stuff is true, this is how you ought to live. And anything short of that is hypocrisy. I don't know where this quote comes from, but I always heard this quote like, allegedly from an atheist, if I believed what you Christians believed, I would crawl on my hands and knees through glass to tell people about it.
Wow.
I mean, so I think in my mind, the emphasis isn't like, oh man, I'm not as strong of a Christian as I thought I was. I think rather it's like I'm seeing examples of how the Christian life ought to be lived
Hmm.
if it's true. And I'm being a hypocrite if I'm not doing something similar or something comparable. Everyone's walk is going to look different. That's totally fair. But there's a sense of urgency to it. If heaven and hell are on the line and every conversation has an impact on that, then it deserves to be taken seriously.
Which is, there you go. That's
Yeah,
nobody's going to argue with that. Or at
no,
least
no,
anybody within the frame, they're not going to argue with that. Deserves to
yeah,
be taken seriously. You're not going to get a preacher to argue with that.
right, right. So I think that I was still a Christian in Rotterdam. I still believed, but I think that the first fault line of the crack in my faith appeared in Rotterdam. Um, I know it's hard, man, being abroad and missing your friends and
Yeah.
family and just feeling so alone and
Yeah.
isolated. And that was hard. Um, so I came home from the Netherlands, a little disillusioned, a little hurt. And it's like, okay, I graduated from FIRE, got my degree from there, which was worthless because it was a non-accredited institution. Um, I wouldn't trade it for anything, right? I mean, those experiences made me the man that I am today, and I'm
Yeah.
grateful.
Yeah. Oh, here comes your
Um,
timer.
oh, there we go. Cool. So, um, so after FIRE, I needed a degree, needed to go to big boy school. So I ended up going to Wheaton College, the place that in my
Oh,
mind earlier was like, oh, I would never go there. That's where fake pseudo Christians who only have like an idea of God but no real passion go. And so then I went to Wheaton. And freshman, sophomore year, it was good, but I was still in a lot of duress spiritually and emotionally, just dealing with, really wrestling through how then shall we live, right? And the more I studied apologetics, I started to see through some of the arguments. The deeper I got into those studies, it's like, well, did Peter really write Second Peter? Um, how historical is the Gospel of John and the quotations of Jesus in it? There were problems. Um, and so all of those things, kind of came to a head in between sophomore and junior year at Wheaton. So I would have been 23 at the time. And it just felt like, my world was crashing down on me. Felt like the rug had been pulled out from under me, and the nihilism that I had been running from for 10 years at this point, it just felt like it was engulfing me, right? I mean, it's like,
mm,
shit, if this isn't true, that's
mm,
the only other game in town. And I really, really don't want that to be the case.
mm,
And then finally, it just sank in like, yeah, I don't want that to be the case, but maybe it just is.
mm.
I really want God to be real. I really want Jesus to be the risen Lord who is coming back again, but maybe it's not true.